Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. As Anthony just said, my name is Marian Wright, and I'm really excited to share some of the work from Brisbane Catholic Education that we've been doing in the career readiness space. Before we begin, what I would like to do is just acknowledge that in Australia, it is National Reconciliation Week, and this is a week where we as a nation explore the steps that we take, big and small, to work towards a more reconciled country. And so in that spirit, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which I am physically, and also where you might be, wherever you are in the world. I am coming to you from Meanjin, which is the traditional name for Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. And I'm currently on Yagara and Turrbal land. But of course, the schools in our system across a range of country in our state. You may not know that much about our system, but Brisbane Catholic Education System is a learning community of approximately 146 schools. We have, about 36 of those schools are P to 12 in secondary, and they were the ones who had really engaged in our project. And what I hope that you will really see in the work that we speak through tonight, or this morning, I should say, is the values of Brisbane Catholic education, which are excellence, integrity, justice, and hope. And that theme of hope and embracing an uncertain future with optimism and confidence is something that will really come through. So to begin, I would like to just give you a bit of an overview of our project. BC's Career Readiness Project was really a response to the significant changes that took place in education and employment over the course of the pandemic. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was work with secondary schools in the first instance to look at the practices that they currently employed to prepare young people for life after school, but then also what needed to change and how we would go about improving some of those things in light of the changes that had taken place. Our stakeholder engagement was really diverse. We spoke to industry, we spoke to universities, RTOs, and then of course, the internal stakeholders that we engaged with were really important because they embarked on an iterative design process with us to improve career readiness practices at a secondary level. It would be remiss of me to speak about this work and not mention the big motivating factor for improving career readiness practices. The Australian Declaration on Education, the Australian Declaration on Education speaks about all young Australians becoming confident and creative individuals as a result of the education that they experience. And career education could be a huge part of that. It can be a huge part of encouraging young people to live productive and fulfilling lives. So I'll speak to you now about the project, and we'll start with the research and review phase. In the review phase, the first thing that we wanted to do was to actually speak to the staff who are on the ground. So these were the staff who are leading career programs, the ones who are working with young people on the front line, planning for the senior phase of schooling and life after school. And we wanted to understand some of the challenges that they were facing. Their feedback about the current practices and challenges were along some of these themes. So firstly, many of them said across the schools that we spoke to that the definition of career education really depends on who is delivering it. And likewise, there was a huge variance in the time and resourcing for career education, and that was really dependent on how it was perceived and then how it was prioritised at schools. The staff who were leading career education or career development programs were often juggling different roles. And so many of them spoke about the tension in between juggling these roles and how that impacted on the quality and the scope of their programs. And likewise, those time constraints exist in school programming because there is so much to get through in a day and also in a term. At times, career education was viewed as a single point of intervention that really was to prepare young people for the secondary phase of schooling. Career staff also weren't sure if their programs were having impact, and were really keen to get some data on the perceptions of that. And many of them, who are teachers themselves, spoke about the challenge to engage other teachers in career education, because many of them could identify that teachers do this every day, but couldn't actually get the time or the space to engage them in the activity. And in terms of the literature we engaged with, there was a real range. We didn't just investigate best practice into career education, but we also really wanted to tap into the national conversation that was happening around learning and how it was evolving. There are two papers in particular on the right-hand side that have been a really interesting point of discussion with schools at the moment, which are all about integrating career education and all learning into a coherent approach. And those are things that have really repositioned the way that schools view programs such as these. So in our design phase, we came back to this quote from Sir John Holman, who published the Good Career Guidance report. And he speaks about best practice in career education being about linking different activities to form a coherent whole. And he says that there is no single bullet. And I will admit that that is absolutely what we went into this project looking for. We were looking for a clear answer and a very clear solution. But the truth is, and we know it's why we're all here, there isn't just one single bullet that can address all of this. And so based on that, we drafted and designed a quality framework for career education that could support schools in a coherent and a whole school approach to doing career education. We didn't see that one program or one set of modules was going to address all of the complexity and the challenges and the needs that our schools faced. And so this framework was designed to help schools plan career education programs, to engage in continuous improvement of them. And last year, we used this framework to also establish a program from the ground up at a brand new school. If you are familiar with the Gatsby benchmarks, you will see an echo of this in this framework. And the statements, are similar and are broken down into a number of indicators, but all of them facilitate the many activities that schools can engage in to do career education well. The second thing that we did in our design phase was design 2 surveys to get insight from students and parents. And what we really wanted to get insight into was what were the things that parents and students felt confident about when it came to career decision making, what were the things they didn't feel so confident about, what were the school-based activities that were having impact, and how could schools use the voice of students and parents to target the improvement of their already existing programs. The 2 surveys were informed by the Career Decision Efficacy Scale, the Australian Blueprint for Career Development, and of course, the quality framework that we tested with schools. And so this took us to the pilot. And in our pilot phase, we put the call out to our secondary to P to 12 schools to engage in an improvement process of already existing career programs. Like I said, we felt that it was really important to not just give schools a ready-made program to trial and test. We wanted to give schools the agency and the ownership to look at what was working for them in their context and make decisions that were unique to them. So we had 8 schools put their hands up to say yes. And I think it's worth mentioning that, alongside the invitation to the pilot, there was no extra time or resource given to these schools. So these schools that put their hands up really could identify that it was important to them, and it was something that was worth taking a risk to look at. And also it required a lot of vulnerability of these schools to get feedback from students and parents about programs that they cared about deeply, but wanted to improve. So our data was really revealing in lots of ways. In the surveys from the students, we learned that students were really keen. They wanted to be more confident about certain skills like building a network, speaking to other people in their local or an international community who were in jobs or industries that they were interested in. Many of them spoke about the desire to have a greater connection between what they were learning and what their life in the future could look like. And we learned that many students are conscious of this tension. And I know many of us who work in schools will have seen this, where parents have expectations that aren't necessarily the same as the child. And so you can imagine, how that impacts on the confidence and the agency of a young person and the decisions that they want to make about their own life. In the surveys of the parents, we learned that parents couldn't always identify where young people were doing education to prepare them for their career and life after school. They also didn't have confidence about how to locate resources online and accessing school support. And it was also important for us to identify that many parents, couldn't actually acknowledge that they weren't familiar with how the world of work had changed since they left school. And so it, established this need for us to continually educate parents about the type of labour market that our young people will experience once they leave school. We also gave parents a chance to just leave some open feedback in the surveys, and I thought I'd share with you some of the comments. Many of our parents could actually admit that the pressure that they felt was on their children to make decisions right now for the future. That pressure was felt by them as well. And many of them, wanted support to address and support their child through the uncertainty of career decision making. And many of them also said that they understood all of the traditional ways that schools do career education engagement, but were really keen to maybe do it in a different way. And likewise, we gave our students the same opportunity. So for our students, they really wanted to engage in more experiential education when it came to careers. And we know this took a huge hit over COVID. They really had this desire to engage with teachers to make a greater connection between what they were learning and their futures. And, again, they really wanted to learn skills about financial management, about networking, and how to manage uncertainty that we know is a huge part of the career decision-making process. So what did we do with all of this data? Well, we talked about it. At each of our participating schools, we hosted some conversations that we called a series of data dialogues. And at the table were school leaders, so principals, assistant principals, the staff who led career programs, and also students. We really wanted to talk about the data. If we think about as a school and as a system, how much data we have about students, there's not a lot that we talk to the students about. And as a big system, it's also sometimes expected of us that we will come in with a solution and come in with a clear way forward. But once again, this was a chance for schools to really own, the feedback about their programs and to decide what it was that they wanted to action. So in the past, BC has done some work around putting faces on the data. And this time we didn't want to just put a face on the data. We wanted to meet the person behind the face and hear their stories and hear their perspectives. And students, to their credit, were incredibly honest. So we shared perspectives. We heard from students, and in purple on the screen, you'll see a quote from a leader at the table who, just in this moment of clarity, sat back, and his words have really stayed with me since I was present at this conversation, where he could actually look back and see holistically that, yes, this was about a career education program, but it was also about so much more. It was also about how we do schooling, how we do learning, and how we engage young people and give them opportunities to contribute to and own the education that they're experiencing. So in our review phase, we worked with schools to document our learnings, to reflect, and then do some action planning. And our most significant learning from this project, I would say, is this. It's that quality career education happens within a coherent and cohesive approach to learning, where career education is both explicit and integrated with learning and well-being. You know, in Australia, and I'm sure it's similar in other places, we have frameworks and structures for curriculum. Our national curriculum also, you know, speaks about well-being. And so this is something that young people engage with. And then schools take responsibility for the career education that is delivered to their young people. And when you push all the circles together, what is really, really clear is at the heart of this is a young person who, you know, isn't just a bucket to fill up with programs, but is a person who is experiencing all of these things so that they can transfer the skills and knowledge that they've gained to decision-making processes just at school and also throughout their life. When we ideated with schools about how to do this integrated approach to career education, here are some of the things that they came up with. And I think it is really important to acknowledge that all of these practices are important and all of them are valuable, but they have so much more impact when they are underpinned by an approach to learning that is coherent, that is cohesive, and where young people have someone who takes them through a process of metacognition where they can reflect on how each of these things culminate in skills and knowledge and experiences that they can take to their career journeys after school. So on the screen in front of you, you'll see 3 stories of schools who had 3 very, very different action plans based on this project. Firstly, St. Thomas More College decided that they really wanted to focus on curriculum and they really wanted to consider how the general capabilities that exist in that curriculum could be transferable from the classroom to career programs and to the lives that young people live. They also focused on parent education and information. Trinity College, who is another one of our schools, actually chose to create an entirely new leadership position. And this person would now drive the explicit career education program, but also work with educators to connect curriculum to careers as well. And finally, our 3rd school, who was the brand new school that we engaged with, the cohort that took part in our study from their school was in grade 7. They were 12 when they took part, and they had some of the most insightful reflections and responses. And as a result of the inclusion of student voice in this project, this school actually decided to create a career development committee that was comprised of parents, students, and members of industry that would create a year 7 to year 12 career program. And, you know, alongside that, they are also now looking at how their curriculum can address real issues that exist in their city right now. So to close, I wanted to reflect on some of the big challenges that, you know, were really evident when I first started work in this space. When I first engaged with schools, I think some of the most challenging questions for me personally were, how do I make other people care about something, you know, that I obviously care about so deeply? How do I bring all the schools with me, including the school leaders? How do we work around different budgets, staffing schedules, regions, resourcing, and how can we help them see what's possible within the already existing constraints in schooling? And so this was the design question that we posed to schools. And this is the question that I will leave you with. If we know what quality practice is, And if we know what effective career guidance is, then what can we do differently with the time and the resource we already have? And I think you'll be surprised with what is possible. If you have any feedback and would like to have more of a conversation about this, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's my email on the screen there. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Thank you.